The Galactic Council Chamber had never been this loud. Picture thousands of different alien species all talking at once, their voices creating a noise that sounded like a broken radio trying to tune into every station at the same time. But this wasn't some regular political meeting or trade dispute. This was pure terror wrapped up in diplomatic language. The Zephyrian plague had started small, just like these things always do. A few people on a mining colony reported feeling stiff in the mornings. Nothing unusual there. Space mining is hard work, and everyone gets sore muscles. But then the stiffness didn't go away. In fact, it got worse. Much worse. Within days, those miners weren't moving at all. Their skin had turned a strange gray color, and when the medical teams arrived, they discovered something that defied every law of biology they knew. The miners had literally become stone. Not dead stone. Mind you, living stone. Their hearts still beat, but you could hear it like rocks clicking together. Their eyes still moved, still showed awareness, but they couldn't speak because their vocal cords had crystallized. The infection spread like wildfire through water. One planet became 2, then 4, then entire star systems. The Zephyrian homeworld, with its beautiful crystal cities and floating gardens, went silent in just 5 days. 17 billion people, all still technically alive, all turned to living silicon statues scattered across their world like the most horrifying art exhibition in galactic history. The emergency session had been going on for 6 straight days. Ambassador Cretiage from the Andromedans hadn't slept in 72 hours. His blue skin now a sickly pale color, as he described watching his own nephew slowly transform on a video call. The Centaurian delegates had brought their entire medical database, hoping anyone, could find a pattern they'd missed. Even the normally calm Bularian representatives were openly weeping, their crystalline tears making small tinkling sounds as they hit the chamber floor. Every solution they tried made things worse. Quarantine protocols? The infection somehow jumped between star systems with no physical contact. Energy barriers? The crystalline plague seemed to feed on certain types of energy, growing stronger. Their most advanced medical nanobots? They got infected too, turning into tiny crystal fragments that spread the disease even faster. The worst part wasn't just that people were dying. It was that they weren't really dead. Families could still see recognition in their loved ones' crystal eyes. Children turned to stone still tried to reach for their parents with arms that wouldn't bend. The psychological trauma was destroying entire civilizations even faster than the physical plague. Dr. Zexran, the galaxy's leading expert on infectious diseases, stood before the assembly with data tablets scattered around him like fallen leaves. His normally confident voice cracked as he delivered his report. Their best estimates suggested the plague would consume the entire galaxy within 18 months. Every computer simulation ended the same way. Total crystallization of all organic life. That's when someone remembered the ancient beacon. It was old, maybe older than any current civilization, found drifting in deep space about 1,000 years ago, covered in warnings written in dozens of dead languages. Most of the text was impossible to translate, but the universal mathematical symbols were clear enough. Last resort emergency signal, used only when facing extinction. The debate about whether to activate it lasted about 30 seconds. When you're watching entire worlds turn to stone, you don't have time for lengthy discussions about potential consequences. The beacon was stored in a maximum security facility on the neutral moon of Kepler Station, guarded by 3 different species and locked behind enough security to stop a small army. When they finally powered it up, the thing didn't just send a signal. It sang, a haunting melody that somehow reached into hyperspace itself, carrying their desperate plea across dimensions most species didn't even know existed. The song told their story without words, broadcasting the image of worlds going silent, of children trapped in crystal bodies, of civilizations facing extinction. For 3 days, nothing happened. Then their deep space monitors started picking up something impossible, a response signal coming from a sector their star charts marked as uninhabitable. The planet designation was Earth, and every database they had screamed the same warning. Death World. Multiple survey expeditions lost. Extreme biological hazards. Recommend permanent quarantine. The message that came back was short. transmitted in perfect galactic standard despite coming from a world that supposedly had no contact with civilization. Just 4 words that would change everything. We're coming to help. Nobody knew what to expect from this mysterious Earth, but they were about to find out that sometimes, when you're desperate enough to call the most dangerous corner of the galaxy for help, you get exactly what you asked for. The moment the human fleet dropped out of hyperspace near Kepler, 442, every alien commander in the quarantine zone reached for their weapons controls. You have to understand, these weren't the sleek, mirror-polished vessels they were used to seeing. The human ships looked like someone had taken a scrapyard, welded it together with determination, and somehow convinced it to fly between stars. The lead vessel was a massive, gray-hulled monster that the humans casually called Mercy One. It had patches welded over what were obviously battle scars, mismatched engine pods that glowed different colors, and external equipment bolted on wherever there was space. Next to the Galactic Council's pristine white ships with their flowing energy shields, it looked like a flying construction site. Admiral Vextar of the Andromedans was the first to break radio silence. Unknown vessels, you're entering a Class X quarantine zone. State your intentions and prepare to be scanned for contamination. His voice carried the authority of someone who'd spent decades keeping order in space. The response came back in perfect galactic standard, but with an accent nobody had ever heard before. This is Captain Tom Bradley of the Earth Medical Emergency Response Fleet. We're here about your plague problem. Thanks for the warning, but we've got this. Before anyone could respond, the human ships were already moving toward the infected planet. No hesitation, no request for detailed briefings, no demands for safety protocols. They just headed straight into what every other species considered a death zone. The alien observers watched in shock as the humans began what they called rapid deployment procedures. Massive bay doors opened on the sides of their ships, and out came dozens of smaller craft that looked even more improvised than the main vessels. Some appeared to be modified cargo haulers with medical equipment strapped to the outside. Others looked like armored shuttles that had been through several wars and somehow kept flying. Dr. Rebecca Hayes was already in the first shuttle heading planetside before the Galactic Council had even finished transmitting their safety warnings. Through the comm channels, the aliens could hear her talking to her team, and her tone was nothing like what they expected. She sounded almost cheerful. All right, people, looks like we've got crystalline infection with atmospheric toxicity. Oxygen-nitrogen mix is a bit thin. Gravity is about 0.8 Earth standard, and the locals have been turned to stone for 3 months. Just another day at the office. Her team actually laughed. They were heading into a plague zone that had killed billions, and they were laughing like they were going on a camping trip. The Zephyrian survivors who could still move watched from their bunkers as these strange aliens walked out of their shuttles wearing what looked like ancient environmental suits. The material appeared to be some kind of thick, flexible plastic rather than the energy field protection systems every other species used. Their helmets were transparent bubbles that seemed almost primitive compared to the holographic displays the Galactic Council preferred. But here's the thing that really got everyone's attention. The humans walked straight into the toxic storms that had been keeping all other rescue attempts at bay. The Zephyrian atmosphere had become poisonous months ago, filled with crystalline particles that would tear apart most species' respiratory systems in minutes. The electromagnetic storms generated by the plague made advanced electronics shut down immediately. The human equipment kept working. Not only did it keep working, but the humans seemed to be taking readings, collecting samples, and actually mapping the storm patterns. Dr. Hayes could be heard over the radio giving a running commentary that sounded like she was describing something mildly interesting rather than a planet-killing disaster. Crystalline particulate density is about 40 parts per million. Electromagnetic interference is cycling every 12 seconds, and the ground-level radiation is comparable to a mild solar flare. Tommy, remember that outbreak on Europa Station back in '97? This is actually easier to work with. Captain Bradley's voice came back from orbit, equally casual. Copy that. Document. We've got clear readings on your position. The local life signs are stable, still crystallizing, but the process is slower than our initial projections. Looks like you've got maybe 6 hours before the next wave of conversions. The Zephyrians didn't understand half of what the humans were saying, but they recognized competence when they heard it. These weird creatures from the Death World weren't just surviving conditions that had killed entire rescue fleets. They were treating it like a routine medical emergency. What really blew everyone's minds was when Dr. Hayes started setting up what she called a forward treatment station right in the middle of the most contaminated zone on the planet. While every other species had been trying to work from orbit using remote drones, the humans were planning to get as close to the problem as physically possible. The excitement in her voice was unmistakable as she called back to her ship. This is fascinating stuff, people. The crystallization process is unlike anything in our databases, but the underlying biology looks similar to the silicon-based infections we dealt with in the Tau Ceti incident. I think we can work with this. Nobody had ever heard someone describe a civilization-ending plague as fascinating before. The first thing Dr. Rebecca Hayes did after setting up her field station was something that made every alien observer think she'd lost her mind. She took off her helmet. Yeah, you heard that right. On a planet where the air itself was toxic enough to kill most species in minutes, this human doctor just casually removed her protective gear and took a deep breath. The Zephyrian survivors watching from their bunkers thought they were witnessing a suicide, but Hayes just stood there, breathing normally, while her instruments recorded everything. Air quality is definitely subpar. She reported back to her team of what sounded like mild disappointment. Feels like Mexico City on a bad day, but nothing we can't handle. The crystalline particles are actually pretty interesting. They're trying to bond with lung tissue, but our mucous membranes are rejecting them naturally. The alien medical teams monitoring from orbit went into complete panic. Admiral Vextar started broadcasting emergency warnings, convinced they were about to witness the first human casualties. But Hayes just kept working, setting up equipment that looked like it belonged in a museum compared to the sleek alien medical technology. Her portable lab was basically a bunch of metal boxes connected with thick cables, all held together with what appeared to be some kind of industrial tape. The scanners made beeping sounds instead of the smooth hums of advanced galactic technology. Everything looked crude, rough around the edges, and completely inappropriate for a sterile medical environment. But then Hayes started doing things that made absolutely no sense to anyone watching. She collected samples of the crystalline infection, not with sterile remote drones like every other species used, but with her own hands, using simple glass containers. She scraped infected tissue directly off crystallized Zephyrians, talking to them calmly while she worked. "I know this looks scary," she told one partially crystallized Zephyrian child whose arm had turned to living stone. "But we're going to help you feel better, okay?" This might tickle a little. The really insane part came next. Dr. Hayes took those infection samples and deliberately introduced them into her own bloodstream. She injected herself with the same plague that had killed billions, while her team calmly recorded her vital signs like this was completely normal procedure. The alien observers were screaming into their communicators, trying to coordinate some kind of rescue mission, but Captain Bradley's voice came back, completely relaxed. "Oh, that's just standard human medical protocol. Doc's immune system needs to get acquainted with the local bugs before she can figure out how to beat them up." Within hours, something incredible started happening inside Hayes' body. The crystalline infection tried to take hold, just like it had in billions of other victims. But instead of spreading and converting her tissues to silicon, her immune system did something that defied every law of galactic medicine. It started learning. Human immune systems, it turned out, were like biological computers that had been programmed by millions of years of surviving on a planet that was constantly trying to kill everything on it. Earth had thrown viruses, bacteria, parasites, toxins, radiation, and countless other biological nightmares of humanity for so long that their bodies had developed into walking biological warfare laboratories. Hayes' white blood cells didn't just fight the crystalline infection. They figured out how it worked, reverse-engineered its biological mechanisms, and then started producing countermeasures. Her body became a living pharmaceutical factory, cranking out antibodies specifically designed to neutralize the plague. But the humans weren't satisfied with just resisting the infection. They wanted to turn it against itself. Dr. Hayes started what she called aggressive immune system negotiation, which involved deliberately exposing herself to different strains of the plague, while her modified immune system learned to recognize and destroy each variation. Her team members followed her lead, each one becoming a living laboratory, working on different aspects of the problem. Dr. Kevin Park focused on the crystalline conversion process itself, letting small patches of the skin partially crystallize before his immune system reversed the process. Dr. Lisa Chun worked on the atmospheric toxicity, breathing increasingly concentrated doses of the poison air until her lungs developed filters that could process it safely. To the watching aliens, it looked like the humans were committing elaborate suicide, but the results spoke for themselves. Within 3 days, Hayes' team had isolated the biological mechanisms behind the plague and started producing what they called therapeutic countermeasures. The treatment process was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Instead of using advanced nanotechnology or energy-based medical systems, the humans used modified versions of their own immune responses. They created biological agents that could essentially teach other species' immune systems how to fight the crystalline infection using human techniques. The first Zephyrian to receive human treatment was a young engineer named Keltar who had been 80% crystallized. The alien medical teams expected him to die within hours. After all, no one had ever survived past 90% conversion. But Hayes injected him with what she casually called process human immune system training materials. Keltar's crystalline skin began to soften within minutes. The stone-like texture gradually returned to normal flesh, and for the first time in months, he could move his arms freely. The alien observers couldn't believe what they were seeing. A plague victim actually recovering, not just surviving, but returning to complete health. Hayes wiped the sweat from her forehead and smiled at her patient. "How are you feeling, buddy? Any pain, stiffness, or weird tingling sensations?" Keltar flexed his newly restored fingers in amazement. "I feel normal. Better than normal, actually. Like my body knows how to fight this thing now." "That's exactly right." Hayes nodded. "Your immune system just graduated from Earth University. Congratulations, you're now plague-resistant." By the end of the first week, the humans had treated over 1,000 Zephyrians using methods that broke every rule of galactic medicine, but somehow worked better than anything else ever tried. Word spread through the galaxy faster than the plague itself had. Human medical teams weren't just treating the Zephyrian crisis. They were completely rewriting everything the galactic community thought they knew about survival, medicine, and what was actually possible for a living species to endure. Dr. Peter Mills had set up his main treatment center right in the heart of Zephyr Prime's capital city, in a zone so contaminated that alien rescue drones shut down within minutes of entering. The atmospheric readings were off the charts. Crystalline particles thick enough to see, radiation levels that should have been instantly lethal, and electromagnetic storms that fried most electronic equipment on contact. Mills was eating lunch, not some specially prepared survival ration or carefully filtered nutritional supplement, but actual food he'd packed from his ship. The Zephyrian observers watching from their sealed bunkers couldn't believe what they were seeing through their telescopes. This human was sitting in the middle of their apocalypse, casually consuming what appeared to be a sandwich, while his primitive-looking equipment hummed along perfectly. The atmospheric contamination here reminds me of industrial-era Beijing. Mills reported back to Captain Bradley during his lunch break. Maybe a little more radioactive. But honestly, I've worked in worse conditions. Remember that toxic waste cleanup in the Amazon? At least this stuff doesn't smell like rotting fish. The local Zephyrians didn't know what to make of this information. Their most advanced environmental suits could only protect someone for about 30 minutes in these conditions. This human had been working outside for 6 hours straight and was complaining that the air wasn't as bad as some place called Beijing. But the real shock came when other galactic civilizations started reaching out to the human fleet with their own impossible problems. The Centaurians have been dealing with a bacterial outbreak on their mining colonies for over 50 years. The infection lived in the rock itself, making any kind of traditional treatment useless. They'd written off entire planets as uninhabitable. Dr. Jenny Walsh took one look at their data and actually laughed. "Rock-eating bacteria? That's adorable. We had something similar in the Sahara Desert back in the 2090s. Give me a week and some basic lab equipment, and I'll have this cleaned up for you." The Andromedans had lost 3 entire research expeditions to a planet with extreme temperature variations, boiling acid rain during the day, frozen methane storms at night. The environment was so hostile that their best survival suits failed within hours. Human response? They set up a permanent research station there and started growing food in the local soil. Captain Tom Bradley found himself fielding calls from desperate civilizations across multiple star systems, each one describing disasters that stumped their greatest minds for decades or even centuries. And every time, his medical teams treated these galaxy-threatening crises like interesting weekend projects. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Humans didn't just survive in conditions that killed other species. They thrived in them. Dr. Mills discovered that the crystalline infection actually made human immune systems stronger after exposure, like a biological upgrade. Dr. Walsh found that the rock-eating bacteria could be modified to produce useful minerals when properly directed. The impossible environments that claimed entire alien research fleets became prime real estate for human scientific outposts. What really got the galaxy's attention was how humans reacted to increasing danger. Most species became more cautious, more careful, more likely to retreat and regroup when facing deadly situations. Humans did the exact opposite. They got excited. Dr. Hayes had moved on to the most severely infected Zephyrian world, where the crystalline plague had mutated into something even more aggressive. The contamination was so intense that it was literally raining crystal dust, and the ground itself had begun converting to living silicon. Alien observers expected the human team to finally retreat. Instead, Hayes requested additional supplies and personnel. "This is fascinating," she reported back with genuine enthusiasm in her voice. "The plague has evolved into a form of environmental engineering. It's not just infecting individuals anymore. It's trying to convert entire ecosystems. This could revolutionize our understanding of large-scale biological systems." Her excitement was infectious in the best possible way. Human medical teams started volunteering for the most dangerous assignments, treating each new crisis like an opportunity to learn something amazing rather than a threat to be avoided. The breaking point came when the Vularian Confederacy, one of the galaxy's most advanced civilizations, officially requested human assistance with a problem they'd been trying to solve for over 200 years. Their home system was slowly being consumed by a form of space-based fungus that fed on starlight and converted solar energy into toxic spores. Dr. Kevin Park arrived at their system with a small team and immediately started making requests that horrified the Vularian scientists. He wanted to be transported directly into the fungal cloud. He wanted samples of the most concentrated spore formations. He wanted to study the organism's life cycle from the inside. 3 weeks later, Park had not only neutralized the fungal threat, but had figured out how to use modified versions of the organism to enhance solar energy collection. The Vularians went from facing extinction to having the most efficient power generation system in their sector. The galaxy was starting to realize that Earth hadn't just answered their desperate call for help. They had unleashed something that treated impossible problems as interesting puzzles, deadly environments as potential vacation spots, and civilization-ending disasters as opportunities for scientific advancement. And the humans were just getting started. The Galactic Council's emergency session was supposed to be about celebrating the end of the Zephyrian Plague crisis. Instead, it had turned into something that felt more like an intervention. Representatives from hundreds of worlds sat in the massive circular chamber, all staring at the holographic display, showing the current state of their galaxy. It was covered in little blue dots. Each dot represented a human presence. "When did this happen?" asked Ambassador Creedh, his voice barely above a whisper. 3 months ago. Humans had been a completely unknown species from a death world nobody had ever visited. Now their research stations and medical outposts were scattered across council space like someone had thrown glitter as star map. Captain Lisa Parker stood at the center of the chamber, looking completely comfortable despite being surrounded by hundreds of alien species, most of whom were staring at her with expressions ranging from awe to mild terror. She wore the same kind of practical uniform all humans seemed to favor. Nothing fancy, just functional clothing that looked like it could survive anything. Well, Parker began with a friendly smile. After we wrapped up the plague situation, we started getting calls. Lots of calls. Turns out you folks have been dealing with some pretty basic problems for way longer than necessary. She gestured to the holographic display, and it zoomed in on a section of Andromedan space. Take the Centauri mining disaster, for example. You've been treating that bacterial contamination as an extinction-level threat for 50 years. Dr. Walsh cleared it up in 8 days using modified yogurt cultures and some creative thinking. The Centaurian delegate's translator made a sound like a broken mechanical bird. Modified yogurt cultures? Yeah, fermented dairy products. Turns out bacteria love to fight other bacteria. You just have to introduce them properly. Basic Earth biology. Parker's tone was so casual, she might have been explaining how to make coffee. The display shifted to show the Vularian system, where the deadly solar fungus had been completely eliminated. The Vularians were facing system-wide extinction from those light-eating spores. Dr. Park not only cleaned that up, but now they're generating 40% more energy than before the crisis started. We just taught the fungus to work for them instead of against them. Admiral Vextar cleared his throat nervously. Captain Parker, while we're grateful for your assistance, the Council is becoming concerned about the scope of human involvement in galactic affairs. Your people seem to be everywhere now. Parker nodded understandingly. I get why that might seem overwhelming. But here's the thing. You folks have been making life really difficult for yourselves. Take your standard quarantine protocols. For example, when you find a hostile environment, you just avoid it, right? Write it off as uninhabitable and move on. She pulled up images of several worlds that had been considered completely dead zones just months ago. Now they all showed thriving human settlements, with people walking around in conditions that should have been instantly lethal. We've set up permanent research stations on 17 worlds your database is classified as certain death. Not only are our people living there comfortably, but we're producing food, medicine, and materials that your civilizations have been struggling to synthesize for centuries. The chamber erupted in nervous chatter. Dr. Zex ran, still traumatized from watching humans deliberately infect themselves with the Zephyrian plague, raise a shaky appendage. But how? These environments should kill any organic life form. That's the beautiful thing about being from a death world, Parker explained cheerfully. Earth spent millions of years trying to kill us with everything from ice ages to asteroid impacts to plagues that make your Zephyrian crisis look like a mild cold. We didn't just survive, we got really, really good at fixing problems. She brought up a new display showing current galactic crisis reports. The list was impressively short compared to the massive database of unsolved problems that had existed just 3 months ago. The Rigelian toxic atmosphere problem? Solved. The vegan system's unstable star situation? Stabilized. The plague outbreaks in the Outer Rim territories? Completely eliminated. That weird space anomaly that's been eating ships in the neutral zone? We figured out it was just hungry and started feeding it properly. The Galactic Council members looked around at each other with expressions that mixed relief with growing concern. Their most persistent, civilization-threatening problems were disappearing faster than they could update their databases. Captain Bradley's voice came through the communication system from a ship in orbit. Lisa, we got 17 new requests for assistance just in the last hour. Apparently, word is getting around that humans can fix things other people can't. Parker smiled apologetically at the assembled delegates. Sorry about that. We're still working on setting up proper request channels. The demand has been a little overwhelming. Captain, interrupted the Zephyrian representative, one of the few beings who could still speak after being partially crystallized. Your people saved our entire civilization. We are eternally grateful. But we must ask, what do you want in return? The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Every species in the galaxy operated on some kind of exchange system. Resources for assistance. Territory for protection. Knowledge for knowledge. Nothing was ever truly free. Parker looked genuinely confused by the question. Want in return? We don't want anything. We're just helping because you needed help and we could provide it. That's what people do, right? The silence that followed was deafening. Hundreds of advanced civilizations, some of which had existed for millions of years, were trying to process the concept of a species that solved problems simply because the problems existed. Finally, the ancient keeper of council records, a being so old that most species have forgotten what his original form looked like, spoke in a voice like rustling paper. In all my millennia of galactic history, I have never encountered a species that offered assistance without expecting compensation. Parker shrugged. Well, technically we do get something out of it. Every problem we solve teaches us something new. Every hostile environment we adapt to makes us stronger. Every crisis we handle makes the galaxy a little bit safer for everyone. That seems like a pretty good deal to us. She gestured to the star map, now showing trade routes that were safer, systems that were more stable, and worlds that were thriving instead of merely surviving. Look, you folks called for help and we answered, but we're not going anywhere. The galaxy is an interesting place, and there are still plenty of problems to solve. We're thinking of this as a long-term partnership. The Galactic Council had asked the stars for salvation, and the stars had sent them the most dangerous thing imaginable. Helpful neighbors who were really, really good at their jobs. And despite all their concerns, the galaxy had never been safer, more prosperous, or more efficiently run.